The Franklin Community Credit Union sounds innocuous enough, but at one point, it was the center of a tremendous scandal and allegations that would shock you to your core. $40 million were stolen from the bank by its manager, but that isn't even close to being the most disturbing thing that went on there. There were allegations of a child sex ring, committing sadistic and horrific abuse of thousands of children, and even murder. You've probably never even heard of it, right? That may just be the most disturbing part. You're listening to Creep It Real, and today we're covering the Franklin cover-up.
Creep It Real is a weekly podcast where we present our theories of the subjects we cover based on our interest and research. Some material may be graphic and disturbing, so proceed with caution.
Hey everybody, it's Ashley and Shy.
Hi.
So we are here this week to tell you some tales, some real serious tales.
We thought Bohemian Grove was deep. I mean, it is, but
yeah,
this is like the second part to that almost, because it all ties in together and it just gets even wilder.
I mean, like we mentioned, we've heard about some of this stuff briefly, but digging into it again, it's like, what in the world is going on here?
Yeah.
I am blown away by pretty much everything I'm reading. Anyway, it is truly mind-blowing. I know, just looking at it, you might be thinking like, oh boy, another episode about a conspiracy, but it is far from being a conspiracy in my opinion.
Well, can it be a conspiracy if there was like so much legitimate, court going on with it? And
you're right, it's a cover-up for sure.
Yeah.
If we took a poll, I'd like you to tell me, everybody, if you have heard of this before, because most people have never heard of this before.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't know the full extent to which some of this stuff goes. So, as we do, let's get into it. This is going to be a good place for me to issue a warning that the topics that we're going to be talking about today and the details are going to be pretty graphic, extremely disturbing. We just want to issue a warning. We are not including this stuff for shock value, but we just want to relay what exactly was going on, how serious the allegations were, and what the information that law enforcement had at their fingertips that they chose to do nothing about. So, last week, we kind of spoke a little bit about how there was a Senator John DeCamp who had found Paul Benassi, who had said he had been molested at Bohemian Grove, and he had spoken to the former CIA director William Colby, who told him to leave it alone. So John DeCamp was at William Colby's house with his wife, Sally Shelton, who was a former ambassador under President Carter, and they were saying to him that sometimes there are forces and events that are too big, too powerful, with so much at stake for other people or institutions that you cannot do anything about them, no matter how evil or wrong they are, and no matter how dedicated or sincere you are, or how much evidence you have. And now that was straight out of a former CIA director's mouth to John DeCamp when he's talking to him about some of this evidence that he has for the Franklin Credit Union and its ties to a child sex ring, essentially, and, all sorts of other illegal activity, serious drug dealing, all sorts of stuff, which is pretty disheartening. Well, it's not like we didn't know this is going on in the world, but really when you think about it, this story takes place primarily in Nebraska while it branches out, and obviously there are implications that it goes much further than Nebraska. But, this is just one place in the country. It's not that populated that has these horrible things going on.
I know. When you bring up Nebraska, like, what do you even think?
Cornfields? I don't know.
Yeah. That's essentially it, and maybe that's why they started it there, because it was so unassuming.
Yeah, it had a reputation, apparently. There is a history of corruption and its politicians and whatnot. Yeah. So Colby had been hired a few months earlier by the Nebraska legislature's investigative committee to look into the single-engine plane crash in which the Senate's lead investigator in the Franklin investigation, Gary Caradori, and his son were killed, which was just one of over 15 mysterious deaths of individuals that were involved in some way with the Franklin investigation. That's a lot of people, and that's in a matter, and we'll talk about it in a little while, but that's like in a not very long time span.
Yeah.
That's a pretty short window, and 15 people mysteriously died, and I'm wondering if it's even safe for us to talk about it.
I know, I'm like, wait a minute.
I'm wondering, are we okay? Oh, Lord. You know, Shai had some issues getting her internet started today.
Weird.
For the first time in
Coincidence?
a while.
Yeah.
Anyway. John DeCamp, he was like, dude, I am not going to let this go. I know these claims are legitimate. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to mention is, sorry to break it up here, but I did realize that I say dude a lot, everyone. I just have to mention, I say it a lot. I don't care. I was going to try not to, and then I was just like, I'm going to let it flow. You know, I sound like a character in a 80s stoner movie, but, you know, just let me be me. Okay, so John DeCamp was like, no, this is legitimate. He said it involved key institutions of government, from courts to cops to the highest level politicians, media representatives, and the wealthiest business leaders. Sounds awfully familiar.
A little bit.
Yeah, this is harkening back to last week. The Colbys continued to voice their opinion that DeCamp should abandon the investigation, which he responded with essentially righteous indignation, which, we feel you, buddy. I mean, I totally understand. It's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
I don't feel like anybody should be untouchable, and that's essentially what they're saying. Or else you're going to end up dead or something, you know? So it's like you don't have a huge amount of choices. DeCamp jokingly suggested that he start carrying a gun, to which Colby laughed and said essentially that if they wanted to get you, having a gun would do absolutely nothing to prevent it. And that makes sense considering the ways that we've seen some of these people end up dead.
And they always like tout it off as like an accident, but clearly it's just,
Right.
It's like so non-coincidental.
Right, it's like it's always a freak accident, and very suspicious circumstances for sure. So Colby said, you know, if you can't stop looking into it, you need to just tell the story, tell everybody you can, get it out, get good investigative reporters on the case, make it known so that you can't be killed without it looking extremely suspicious. So what we're going to be presenting you in this coverage is evidence that was gathered for the Nebraska legislature's special committee of the Franklin case, which found and verified the tracks of criminal activity where law enforcement purported to see absolutely nothing. I just want you to get yourself prepared for this because it's disturbing. All right.
A little background on politics in Nebraska in the early mid-'80s, just so you guys are aware.
Yeah.
The governor, Bob Carey, was super corrupt and was essentially using his position to rob the state to fund his friends. He cheated farmers out of subsidies, peddled junk bonds to investors on false pretenses, and created a new state agency specifically so he and his friends could get millions in low-interest loans.
He's a winner. Good guy.
Yeah. Ugh. There's an incredible amount of evidence supporting this, and according to Carey himself, he entered politics to make money. He said in business, you have to cater to politicians to get what you want, and the only way to actually make money was to go into politics. So his right-hand man was the owner and lead stockholder in this one bank in Nebraska, and influenced many of his business deals as governor on his advice. This dude's bank was in major trouble, along with a handful of others due to some law changes that created a drastic change in interest rates at the time. The governor ended up essentially causing a panic about his friend's bank competition, which caused citizens to make a run on the bank and withdraw everything they had, essentially ruining it immediately and ending any notion of a buyout, which was already underway. So thousands of elderly depositors in the bank were rendered penniless, while Governor Carey's friend's bank, which was admittedly in more trouble than the one they'd lambasted, ended up being able to file bankruptcy and come away clean from the whole debacle, something Carey wouldn't let the competition bank do.
I mean, it was the most shady bunch of crap. He basically paved the way to ruin this other bank so that it could take attention away from his friend and his crappy business. And
so it was like the whole like switch and bait type thing.
Yeah,
Oh, give him a little razzle dazzle here. So.
Totally. I mean, and unfortunately, the other guy who was trying to take care of it the other bank owner who was trying to take care of it in a timely manner to save his depositors, he ended up being bankrupted and thrown in jail because they created all these laws that he couldn't do all this stuff specifically to hurt him. Anyway, I mean, this governor sounds like the biggest piece of trash. I mean, we talk about lots of pieces of trash, but this guy, I mean, he was so corrupt. I cannot even believe it. The governor is so openly corrupt. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
In April of '83, Carey and his friend, among others, formed the American Investment Group, or AIG.
Which I think we've all heard of that.
Yeah. So Kerry proceeded to fire everyone in his administration that had been involved in the previous years and replace them with people who had literally no idea how to do their job. To me, that just sounds like a way to get people in to turn them into like sheep.
Right.
And they won't ask questions, so that's all they know.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the man had appointed to replace the banking director was a guy who said, and I quote, "I can't even balance my checkbook."
He's in charge of the banks. He can't balance his checkbook, and he admits it openly. I'm like, this sounds so eerily similar to a situation I feel like is going on at this very moment.
Yeah.
I was totally blown away by that. I was like, oh my gosh, how history just repeats itself over and over and over and over.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Like me and Kevin were talking about that, and they're like, human history just, it recycles itself. There's always like this huge thing happening, and it's like this build up to this extravagant event, and then
nothing is learned also.
Yeah, nothing's ever learned.
No, it's totally crazy. Anyway, it's frustrating because it's like this small percentage of people that actually has any awareness of anything, and the rest of them just ruin it for us.
I know. And we all sit back and just like stare with our mouths wide open like, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah, it's
Are you
insane.
kidding me? So Nebraska's major press outlets answered with a deafening silence, perhaps due to the fact that the World Herald was heavily invested in Governor Kerry's business, and Kerry's right-hand man, Bill Wright, was a longtime board member for the Lincoln Journal.
Oh, man. Is this just going on everywhere all the time? Truly.
Oh, yeah.
Help.
I've got friends in low place.
Depressing.
So the legislature's investigation began on October 1988 and ended on January 9th, 1991. When a new legislature was sworn in, they had the option to renew the investigation, but didn't because many members knew the stakes and were terrified. So John DeCamp himself was a duly elected delegate in Nebraska and wrote the DeCamp memo, which began a new phase of the Franklin case. He knew that the Omaha World Herald had been publishing false info, but had previously had no form or legal right to respond to these false claims. He was an attorney specializing in cases of allegations by children against adults in the area of abuse. So he had like really a special interest in this.
He was he was as much of an expert as you can be in child abuse allegations against adults.
Yeah. Within the year prior to writing the book where we got most of our information, the Franklin cover-up, he had overturned 2 felony charges against men in rural Nebraska who were charged with abusing their daughters based on allegations from their daughters, but DeCamp was convinced they were not telling the truth. He successfully proved this in both cases when the daughters broke down about lying and told him the reason why they made up the lies about the abuse.
Right.
And as Ashley was just mentioning to me, and we were talking about this sort of thing, it is really important to weed out the lies from the truth involving this.
Right. You know, falsely accusing people of these types of crimes is definitely undermining the real victims of those crimes.
Yeah.
So it's important to note that John DeCamp wasn't just running around wildly accusing all sorts of innocent adults of sex crimes. So, you know, we want to emphasize that. He was a legitimate senator, you know, he had an expertise in this area, and he was very fair as far as the way that he went about defending and prosecuting accusations of adults against children sex crimes. So the fact that he is a well-known senator who is going to come out publicly and say that he believes that there is ample evidence against these specific players in this story for abusing children and murdering them is pretty serious. Like, he's not just some crazy alternative news site guy who takes every story that comes along and runs with it. Like, this guy looked into this
Alex
seriously.
Jones.
So he was legit. Anyway, I just want to emphasize that. He was completely legit.
DeCamp also served as a lawyer for the National Child Abuse Defense and Resources Center in Nebraska, which fights against false accusations of child abuse made up of adults who have been falsely accused of child abuse. He says without reservation in one Franklin-related instance after another, there was sufficient evidence and corroboration available for anyone seeking it to back the victim's stories. The legislature's main investigator, the late Gary Caradori, had an enormous amount of leads that law enforcement wouldn't pursue. Why? I don't know.
Well, I do.
We're all gonna know.
We'll all know soon.
Yes. The treatment of Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi is one clue in what will be done to suppress the truth about the Franklin Credit Union scandal and its broader implications. Mm-hmm. Members of state senate and investigators found out early on in a personal and violent manner.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, are we even okay in 2018 talking about this? I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, if we're dead, then it was related to this.
I really hope that they let me go eat my first Korean barbecue, though. Before they offer me.
I need to do a few things before then, people. Let us do a few things.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so we're going to move on. Some background about child abuse and the kind of crimes that we're going to be talking about. A report in 1990 called SOS America from the Washington-based Children's Defense Fund. In that report, it was reported that 2.2 million children were reported abused, neglected, or both in 1987. This was a 225% increase in a 10-year span and a 48% increase in the previous 5 years. And while when I read that, I kind of think, well, also, is that because, it just wasn't reported as much? It may not be that it was the action itself increased, but it wasn't reported as such back then.
Yeah.
Dr. Nicholas Groth, the director of the sex offenders program at the Connecticut Correctional Institute, told the New York Times in 1990 that if we saw the same numbers of children suddenly developing the same kind of illness, we'd think we had a major epidemic on our hands. Which that is kind of frightening, and maybe that has increased. Who knows? Because maybe with technology and the development of modern society, it did become more prevalent for mass child sex rings and kidnappings and whatnot to happen.
Well, that's what we were kind of mentioning in Bohemian Grove is, the dark web does exist and people do so much on it, and they say it's untraceable and untrackable and that the government can't monitor what's going on, but our government and politicians are involved in these things going on the dark web and whatnot. So,
a 28-year FBI veteran and former special agent in charge of the Bureau's LA Field Division said that the FBI doesn't keep record of the number of missing children in a year. They keep an accurate number of stolen cars, homicides, rapes, robberies, but not disappeared kids, which is troubling. But an independent group has created their own record of missing children, but the FBI itself, I don't think, does it. So this veteran was convinced that it's because there is a staggering number of missing children, and if the public ever really found out about the true number of missing children that there are, they would demand immediate action to be taken, and they either don't have the ability to do anything about it, they're involved, whatever. They just don't want to keep a list. So the Franklin Credit Union scandal, centered in Omaha, Nebraska, gives insight into the horrific world of child abuse and organized illegal drug peddling, patronized and protected by powerful political and business figures. It is so creepy, everyone. The case itself received very little media attention in 1988 when the FCU was raided by federal agencies and shut down. The manager of the credit union, Lawrence E. King, or Larry King, who we mentioned last episode. Boo, Larry King. Big time boo. He was the one whose personal photographer was asked by Hunter S. Thompson if he would record a snuff film. He was a rising star in state and national Republican circles and an officer of the National Black Republican Council. There was 3 of them, so of course he was, it's not hard to get ahead in that group, and sang the national anthem at the GOP National Convention in 1984 and 1988. There was nearly $40 million missing from the coffers of this small credit union, okay? He robbed the bank. He and his, friends robbed this bank and its patrons of $40 million, basically the citizens of Nebraska. The financial scandal soon developed into something more when it became known that children from Omaha and surrounding areas had been flown from city to city to be abused at parties held by FCU's officers and well-known Nebraskans, including nationally prominent Republican Party activists. The New York Times was quoted as saying, "A lurid, mysterious scandal begins taking shape in Omaha." But 3 years later, the locals are told the case is closed and people living outside eastern Nebraska have probably never knew it even existed, which we already said is pretty much the case. Nobody has ever heard of Bohemian Grove, let alone Franklin Credit Union scandal. Larry King ended up serving a small amount of jail time for misappropriation of funds after a guilty plea, and that's really an underwhelming conviction. It's really $40 million we're talking about here, on top of other bizarre and terrible accusations. Law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level said that there was not enough evidence of drug peddling and organized child abuse or sadistic activity by Larry King to bring charges on those matters. I'm fairly positive in this episode you're going to be buried in a ton of evidence of this exact activity, so be prepared. One of 2 grand juries came to the conclusion that the allegations were a carefully crafted hoax. Wow, dude. I can barely even side-eye this enough without falling over. I truly don't understand. I mean, it would have to be the most elaborate hoax conducted by children, mind you.
Well, and then I'm sure if that was the case, there would have been more media coverage on it in publications, magazines, newspapers, everything like that. And yeah, like what children are out there plotting to bring down politicians?
I mean, it is that's ridiculous. Okay. So on June 21st, 1991, 21-year-old Alicia Owen was pronounced guilty in Douglas County, Nebraska on 8 counts of felony perjury. 2 months later, she was sentenced to serve 9 to 27 years in prison, which is pretty unprecedented. She was indicted for telling a grand jury before which she was testifying in 1990 she was sexually abused as a juvenile by a Nebraska District Court judge, chief of police of the city of Omaha, the manager of the Franklin Credit Union, among others. She also witnessed the abuse of other children by figures in Nebraska's political and financial establishment, which she named. Among them were the publisher of the state's largest newspaper, the Omaha World Herald. A familiar name we've already heard.
Oh, yeah.
Owen testified that she was in a group of Nebraska children who were used for years as drug couriers, traveling nationwide for some of Nebraska's wealthiest and most powerful and prominent businessmen. Which, how sad is that, everyone? I mean, truly. 2 grand juries, one local, one federal, had a mandate to consider these and other charges of child abuse connected with the Franklin Credit Union, and they chose to instead indict the victim witness. I find this to be extremely insane. So Dr. Judy Ann Denson Gerber, she was a lawyer and psychiatrist and nationally prominent specialist on child abuse. During her visit to Nebraska to speak to the committee for the Franklin Credit Union investigation, she said, "This is unprecedented, probably in the history of the United States. If children are not telling the truth, particularly if they have been abused, they need help, medical attention. You do not throw them in jail." And here's the kicker, everybody. Both grand juries admitted that Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi, whose testimony extensively corroborated Owens's, had been badly abused, but they said that this was done by persons other than those the young people named. The juries both concluded, I don't really understand how you can make that judgment, how you can make that call for them, that you were abused, this stuff did happen to you, but I think you're lying about this very specific and powerful names that you're naming to us in these testimonies. Like, are you freaking kidding me right now? I don't understand. I am going to throw a chair through a window real quick. So Benassi was also indicted for perjury. There were 2 other witnesses whose stories corroborated with Owen and Benassi's, but they both recanted under intense pressure. There is audio of Owen talking to one of these boys that recanted his story, and we're going to get further into that, but I mean, this boy sounds terrified. She sounds absolutely 100% serious. She is telling the truth, and she is just imploring him to not recant his testimony, and he's just so scared. He's like, I've got to do it. I've got to do it. The fact that you have children testifying against certain people of doing horrific things, and then you decide that those children deserve to go sit in jail for that is atrocious, truly.
Yeah, for sure. And I just don't understand if a kid's lying and they're being pressured so much, and, you know, what kid wants to be convicted of something like that and spend the rest of their fun years in jail or in prison?
What kid wants to come out and have to testify at trials?
Yeah.
Obviously, something other than that was actually going on. So, days after Owen's conviction, 3,000 Nebraskans responded to a local radio poll, and 94% of them believed that she had been railroaded and there was a cover-up. The entire area, essentially, it was just, oh well, what are you going to do? So the treatment of Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi is one clue in what will be done to suppress the truth about the Franklin Credit Union scandal and its broader implications. Is that Henry snoring?
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
That's my dog snoring. Sorry. They're trying to stay cool, so they're in the office with me. Gary Caradori, new chief investigator for Nebraska legislators' Franklin Committee, told his wife in August of 1989, "If even half of what I've heard is true, this is the biggest thing to ever hit Nebraska." The United States, really.
Really? That's what I was thinking.
In September of 89, someone broke into their home. Weird. Huh. By January of 1990, Caradori wrote Nebraska Secretary of State that he and his employees had been followed and questionable situations had arisen during the investigation. He said threatening situations resulted numerous times. Why? He asked. Am I too close to something they don't want to become public? Yeah.
Probably.
In early April, a repairman reported to Caradori that his phone was tapped, something that was verified by the phone company. How creepy is that?
Yeah, I know.
And if I was a repairman, I'd probably pee my pants. I'd be like,
I'm getting out of this situation.
Yeah, bye. Still, Caradori continued with his investigation. In late May, he wrote to the Franklin Committee chairman, Lauren Schmidt, telling the senator that he felt they were the only ones seriously working to get the case out in the open and felt the investigation should be terminated. In June, he attended a barbecue where most attendings were members of a concerned parents group of citizens outraged by the lack of serious investigation into the allegations of child abuse by state and federal authorities and the campaign by the Omaha World Herald to discredit young victim witnesses.
Those assholes.
Yeah. He arrived to the barbecue in a 10-year-old Corvette, saying he had to take it out of storage because he believed his other vehicles to have been tampered with, and he was sure no one had ever seen that car.
He was not just some overly paranoid lunatic or anything.
Yeah.
This is a person being truly afraid.
He was planning to sell his boat due to the possibility of tampering, but really feared that someone would tamper with his plane, saying it would be easy to tamper with a plane. Later that June, Caradori phoned Senator Schmidt and excitedly told him, "We got them," saying he just developed new evidence and there's no way they can get out of it now.
Oh,
Womp womp.
Poor Gary Caradori. Yeah.
He and his son Andrew were flying to Chicago for the All-Star game in early July, and he told Schmidt that he was going to do a little investigating on the side while he was there and would review the evidence with the senator upon his return. On the Wednesday morning that he was to return, Senator Schmidt was in his office talking with a journalist about the Franklin investigation, relating to the numerous threats received by himself and Caradori and Caradori's evaluation that they wouldn't kill either of them because it was, in his words, too obvious. Then again, you never know. At 10:30 a.m., Schmidt received a call telling him that Gary Caradori was dead. Weird coincidence? I think not.
Oh, yeah, really.
At 2:30 a.m. on July 11th, Gary and his son were flying back to Nebraska when a farmer reported seeing a bright flash of light in the sky, heard an explosion, and saw a plane plummet toward the ground. Both Gary and his son AJ were killed, with wreckage scattered over 3/4 of a mile. The eyewitness account of a flash and explosion was aired on the early edition of local TV news in Nebraska, but was pulled from all subsequent reports.
It sounds like freaking explosives were put on the plane or something like that for this farmer to see a flash and explosion, and then the wreckage was scattered. I'm like, what happened there?
Yeah, because if a plane's engine fails, it's not gonna. I wouldn't think it would be scattered like that. There'd be parts and stuff after it crashed, but 3/4 of a mile, stuff's being found.
There's not a lot of other good explanations for this.
Gary's brother said he had recently told him he hoped they didn't cover up the investigation findings, that there were lots of big names included, and he hoped their money wouldn't sweep it under the rug. He cared dearly and worked day and night for the victims. That makes me my heart hurt, because clearly if these guys are working so hard and putting their lives on the line, there has to be validity to this, and there's no way it's just some big dumb hoax,
right. He wasn't terrified of all of this stuff happening to him, and he still continued to persist in looking into this because he is just doing it for the wrong reasons or doesn't have legitimate evidence. Obviously he's I need to help these people, so it's really awful.
Yeah. And this next part's even more sad because I can't even imagine. So, Sandy Caradori, Gary's wife, never received official notification of her son and husband's deaths. She only heard it on the news and from friends.
That's terrible.
I know. Just that poor woman. I'm getting all emotional because I'm PMSing and so slept right now. I'm I'm gonna start crying. Oh my god. Okay. I gotta keep it together.
Deep breaths.
Early the next day, before their bodies were back from Illinois, the FBI descended upon Caradori's office with a subpoena for all his records.
What? Bitch.
I know, come on. Like, just give them some dignity.
I mean, and what, anyway, are you so interested in? To me, the fact that they did that makes me think they knew he had something, whether they were trying to know it themselves or cover it up, I don't know.
Yeah.
Why do all these institutions have to be so sprinkled with corruption?
Shade.
Yeah.
It was later found that Caradori's briefcase, which supposedly contained newly acquired evidence that he spoke about to Senator Schmidt and was reported to contain damning photo evidence, was missing from the wreckage altogether.
What? And not in the everything was burned to bits kind of way, and just the it straight up isn't there that kind of way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
According to the Lincoln Journal, the day after Caradori's death, Schmidt confirmed that Gary Caradori had been trying to obtain photos that some alleged victims said were taken of them during the period that they were being abused. He also confirmed that Caradori had been told that some of those allegedly involved in child sex abuse had exposed some victims to satanic cultism. He was working on places and times. He was also working on leads in Washington, D.C. There was a great deal of mystery surrounding the crash. After months of investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board come up with no cause for the crash. From late 1988 to mid-1991, at least 15 people related to the Franklin investigation, from investigators, alleged perpetrators, to potential witnesses, died sudden, many of them violent deaths.
So that's it, man. 3 years. Not even 3 years. Two and a half years. There were 15 freaking people who died, okay, related to this case. So
that, just doesn't happen.
Mm-mm.
You know?
Yeah.
In December of 1990, when Dr. Denson Gerber was preparing for her trip to Nebraska, at the request of legislature's Franklin Committee, she consulted with several friends with relevant expertise. One, a New York State policeman, warned her, "Don't go. Nebraska is death blazed."
Woo!
What?
Yeah. That is from a policeman.
I'm never going to Nebraska.
I'm like, is this current day or just back then? I don't know.
Seriously.
Not to just
insane.
I mean, I don't know anybody in Nebraska. If you're out there and you're listening, I'm sorry. I hope it's not. I hope it's not Mad Max out there.
Caradori's death cast terror over the state. Civil rights leader James Bevel visited in October 1990 on a fact-finding mission and said he'd never seen such terror on people's faces. This atmosphere in that which the grand juries indicted the victim witnesses Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi. The Senate Franklin Committee ended in January 1991, and in June of that same year, Alicia Owen was found guilty of felony perjury, and Douglas County prosecutors dropped the charge on Paul Benassi. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard to believe that we're not talking about jury pools, judges, prosecutors, whatever, who are corrupt as heck, making decisions with their friends in mind. Everybody is connected. In case you didn't notice, Alicia Owen was saying that a Nebraska District Court judge was one of the people attending these ritualistic, murdery, child sex abuse parties. So you don't think that had any bearing on the way some of these people were conducting themselves, like some of the chief of police? You know, I mean, come on. You know, it just makes me, it really gets me angry. So we're going to come back to Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi and everything that they said, all the details of what they were claiming happened to them. We're going to talk about some other children who had come forward in Nebraska to report almost identical stuff going on. There are so many freaking people in this web of child sex abuse and murder that it is truly mind-boggling that nothing became of this whatsoever. It is insane to think that all these unrelated children are lying to such great detail. Anybody that has ever known a dang kid, try to get them to lie in great detail about something and keep their story straight and say the same story over and over. Yeah, right, man. So let's go back to June of 1985 when Washington County, Nebraska Sheriff's Department contacted a Nebraska Department of Social Services, DSS, worker regarding the MacArthur children who were living in foster care with Jared and Barbara Webb. They said that the children were in their custody due to an abuse complaint, and the children were saying that they were beat with a railroad iron and a belt, and that the abuse had been happening for a while, but they were afraid to report it. Jarrett Webb had worked for 10 years at the Omaha Public Power District and was a board member of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union. Barbara Webb was I'm just going to call him Larry. So Barbara Webb was Larry King's cousin. The Webb's foster child, Sean MacArthur, and their adopted son, Joey Patterson, were removed from the Webb's custody. That month, multiple of their other foster children and adopted children tried to make a break from their house, either alone or in pairs, multiple times, and there were up to 9 children in their home at one time. So these kids kept trying to break free of this house. In August, Joey's sister Kimberly Patterson Webb and her brother Michael ran away but were returned to the Webbs. In November, Nellie Patterson Webb fled to the home of her grandmother Ruby, and DSS reported in December that their office interviewed Nellie and Kimberly, both separately and together. Both girls stated numerous times that they refused to go back to the Webbs and stated that they received whippings and beatings from both Barbara and Jarrett at different times, starting in 1978, which was approximately 8 months after they moved into their home as foster children. These included beatings with extension cords, belts, rubber hoses, and a narrow piece of heavy black rubber that was 2 feet long with several holes at each end. It's pretty descriptive.
Yeah.
The girls were made to remove all of their clothing before they were hit, mainly on their back or their butts, but occasionally they were hit on their head or their face. So Nellie was removed from the home and placed in foster care, and she was interviewed at the Washington County Sheriff's Office by State Patrol investigator Jane Tooley, who found that the abuse was not limited to beatings. So Nellie stated that she had been sexually abused starting around the age of 9 when Jarrett Webb kissed her for a long time and she pulled away because she couldn't breathe and it was nasty. She stated he was French kissing her and slobbering in her mouth.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, it is disgusting. It really makes my skin crawl. But like I said, you have to hear the full extent of this and just how depraved these people are. On one occasion, Jarrett made her take a nap with him, and she said he played with all of her body parts, and so that was the first time that he actually sexually abused her. When she was 10 or 11, at night when everyone would go to bed, he would call her into his room, and when she didn't come, he would threaten to whip her. So one time he pulled the sheet down and put her on top of him, and she stated that she could feel that he didn't have underwear on. Again, I want to barf.
Yeah.
It's horrifying. So this girl was 10 years old, okay? And these people were clearly using their role as foster parent to conduct some truly sickening and horrifying things with these kids because they didn't care about them. And somehow they were able to just continue doing this with 9 kids at a time.
Yeah.
That's horrifying. At 15, Jarrett punished her by making her undress and lay on the bed, and he beat her with a rubber strap, and then he began to sexually abuse her and beat her at the same time. When she began to cry, he left the room. So in February of 86, DSS requested an immediate and emergency removal of the rest of the Webb children, and it listed 8 separate concerns, among them being that there were repeated allegations of physical abuse told to DSS by 6 other children during September interviews. They had been struck for long periods of time while naked. They had been denied meals in the home for weeks at a time. There was sexual abuse that was repeated. The kids that were removed from the home had an intense concern for the physical and emotional well-being of the children that had remained in the home, to the point where that was a point of concern for the DSS. So DSS memos show that the Webbs aggressively sought to terminate their status as adoptive parents of Nellie and Kimberly immediately after Nellie ran away in 1985. Under DSS rules, this would cut short the investigation into the mistreatment of the girls, which is utter BS, so you can relinquish your rights and somehow get away then with prior abuse. I don't see how that is okay. While relinquishment of adoptive children is extremely rare, the DSS began negotiations with the Webbs to do so because they were pieces of trash. They really didn't want them to have the kids either.
Yeah.
The Webbs attorney that conducted the negotiations on their behalf was Gary Randall, whose brother Casey, Kimberly and Nellie described as Larry King's maid. The Webbs had additional help in the relinquishment of their adopted daughters by Patrick Tripp, who would have been the very official who would have handled a criminal prosecution of them had there been one. Okay, so he helped them relinquish their adoptive rights, and if he chose to take this to a criminal court, he would be the one prosecuting them, which seems like slightly a conflict of interest there. In the pattern of gross abuse, the state suspended these people's, the Webb's foster care license in June of 86. And that man, Patrick Webb, who would have prosecuted against them, he chose not to file sexual abuse charges or any other charges against the Webbs. Instead of investigating her reports of the Webb's involvement in pornography and child prostitution, Tripp called Nellie a liar. And Tripp's attitude was recorded by Julie Walters, who was a youth care worker called on to interview Nellie and Kimberly because they had described the abuse of the boys residing at Boys Town, a large orphanage west of Omaha where Walters was employed. In her 50-page report on the child abuse described to her by the girls, Tripp figures as an adversary for the children. And she says, when presented with Jane Tooley's investigation, Pat Tripp, the Washington County prosecutor, said he didn't believe Nellie and he wanted her to take a polygraph. At his request, Nellie was given 4 polygraph tests administered by state troopers at the State Patrol office. The state trooper, after Nellie's testing completed, told Kathleen Sorensen he tried to break Nellie down a bit, but he was convinced she was telling the truth. Although the polygraph test showed Nellie was not being deceptive, attorney Pat Tripp maintained he still did not believe what she said. He said Nellie fantasized those stories to the point that she believed that they were true. Dude, this guy is such a dick.
What a loser.
What the hell? I mean, truly. Tripp's line that child victims in Nebraska just invent abuses and therefore their complaints need not be seriously investigated would be repeated by one law enforcement agency after another through the Franklin case, down to the dang perjury conviction of Alicia Owen. So, in case we weren't aware, which I was not, and I didn't even know who this Pat Tripp person was, and I know it's like, why are you bringing all these names into this? But you just have to like see the levels of freaking cover-up that go on for all of these people. It's insane. Pat Tripp was a good friend of 2 individuals who were now named by Nellie and Kimberly as being involved with the Webbs, which were Fort Calhoun Superintendent of Schools Deward Finch and Fort Calhoun High School Principal Kent Miller. And this is according to the actual Franklin Committee investigation. Those 2 men were named. So the superintendent of schools and a high school principal. Really awesome. So when the Webbs were away, the kids would snoop through the house, and they found pornographic videotapes in a bag under the Webbs' bed, one specifically showing teenagers involved in sexual activity. Nellie and Kimberly knew Larry King had provided them with the tapes from eavesdropping. Another thing they found was pornographic magazines in the basement. And once their son Sean was suspected of snooping in the magazines, and he wasn't allowed to eat for 1 week. Another thing was a box of quote-unquote romantic novels in Mrs. Webb's closet where there were stories like mothers that were having sex with their sons. I don't understand how these people are so freaking perverse, but they are.
I wonder, like, what goes wrong in your head to have you be, like, this level of just, I'm going to say it, you're a sick psycho. I don't care if that's politically correct.
I don't care either. Psycho. I don't understand. I don't understand what... And how do these people connect to each other, you know?
Right?
That's the one thing that would make me question its legitimacy. But there's too much evidence here, so I don't. But how do they connect to each other, you know? I don't, like, it runs in the family and then you just, like, find creeps? I don't get it. And then the last thing I'll mention that they found in the house were stacks of 8x10 photo envelopes that were marked "Do Not Bend." And I think, and this is also merging into the Johnny Gosch case right now, but I believe that those 8x10 photos in those envelopes were photos being taken of children so that certain people could have a preference of child who they liked, and they would be brought an array of 8x10 headshots, essentially, that they could choose from and get a kid. Okay? I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think it is. So you know, as we get into this, I think it will become more clear that probably is going on here. But it's, you know, that is how sick it is. And we heard that, you know, Hunter S. Thompson, he wrote that Hey Rube book where, I mean, he was like, yeah, they buy and sell kids, they kidnap them right off the street. Johnny Gosch may have been selected like a dang out of like a catalog and ripped off the street, you know, because anyway, we'll cover Johnny Gosch, but it sounded like somebody may have been kind of scouting the area for certain types of children at these little newspaper boys. Anyway, I don't put that past any of these people here, and you know, we're only going to get more into this. So, okay, I get worked up and I get ahead of myself. I need to calm down. Okay, so the report also conveys the Webb's pricey lifestyle and involvement of more people, including obviously Larry King, the cousin. Although at a hearing in March of 86, Mr. Webb stated that he earned $32,000 a year, the Webb's home was furnished lavishly, and Mrs. Webb had a 4-carat diamond ring. All custom-made dresses. I don't know how you can afford that. And when the Webbs threw a party, they included caterers and limos. I'm like, every guest got a limo home? Oh my lands. That's gotta cost something.
That's a fancy party.
Yeah. Larry King had parties every other week, and he would request one of the Webb's kids to attend, and they had no choice in the matter. So it sounds to me like these people became foster parents so that they could essentially have a freaking rent-a-service with their foster children.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so sick. These are already disadvantaged, coming from fragile situations, and you're like just taking advantage of them in the worst possible way. The Webb children said that they talked to boys at the parties who were from Boys Town, and after examining yearbooks from a few years prior, Kimberly said that 4 of the boys attended some of Larry's parties during the summer of 84 and 85. I have to wonder if one of these is good old Paul Benassi.
I would have to say so.
Probably, because that's around the time that he wrote in his journals, and this very elaborate hoax that they put on. At the parties, there would be 30 to 40 adults, and both men and women. The attendees were more white than black because Larry King said that blacks get ignorant when they drink and tighter with their money, while whites spend more money when they're drunk. Also present at the parties were some prostitutes and kids that were aged between 16 and 22, about 20 total. If a man was interested in a young lady, he would hold out a folded $50 or $100 bill and whisper something in their ear, and they would go upstairs or in some other room of the house. And Nellie and Kimberly said that the prostitutes told them that they gave half of their money to Larry King. Larry also gave some of the boys at the parties new cars. And they said the sexual activity was not always behind closed doors and sometimes involved more than 2 people. Do what you want, everyone, but we're talking about children here.
Yeah.
So, not okay. Larry claimed to donate money to Boys Town and be on the board of directors at the girls' club, and he would get boys to come to his home by asking them to come do yard work, and if he asked them to do something and they refused, he might hit them or threaten them with violence. Nellie said Larry had a really bad temper, and I can only imagine, hearing some of the stories, that is the truth.
Nellie accompanied Mr. and Mrs. King and their son Prince to Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York beginning at age 15. She missed 21 days of school entirely under the pretense that she was accompanying her aunt and uncle to be Prince's babysitter. On those trips, Nellie said that she saw, at the time, Vice President George Bush and saw him again at one of Larry's parties in D.C.
Oh, who did we talk about last week as part of Bohemian Grove? There's that name again, old George Bush. Sorry.
Making an appearance.
Yep.
In D.C., at some of the parties, there are just men, and in the case of the party that George Bush attended, only older men and younger men in the early 20s. Gross. Nellie said she had seen sexual activity go on at these parties. She said every guest had a bodyguard, and she saw some wearing guns. All guests had to produce a card which was run through a machine to verify the guest was who they said. They were then frisked before entry.
High security here.
Right? After Nellie and Kimberly raised Larry King's name, Detective Julie Waters asked some discreet questions about King from Boys Town employees and some people in the Omaha community. Here are some of the responses he got. If you mess with him, you'll get your legs broken. On the outside, he has all the appearances of an upstanding citizen, but underneath he is very dirty. Omaha has a very large underworld, and he's a very powerful man nationally. Maybe he didn't have all the connections personally, but he knows people who do. King used to be very active in Big Brothers and took more than an appropriate interest in the young men.
And that's a recurring thing that we will hear about King.
Kimberly overheard Mrs. Webb tell someone over the phone regarding Fort Calhoun School District Superintendent, I got him all the way. I caught him several times down there with black girls. And Nellie and Kimberly saw Mr. Finch leave the Webb home on numerous occasions, and they would come meet with him at the school office. Sometimes Principal Kent Miller was present also. Mrs. Webb carried a very large Gucci bag with her, and the girls saw her carry in the photo envelopes they'd seen in the closet at least one time, telling Kimberly she was showing him pictures from a trip.
Oh my land. So the school superintendent, sometimes the principal, shaking my head, man.
Right?
What the hell? I mean, like, we didn't know that sometimes people use those positions to take advantage, but still so horrifying.
The Walters report and DSS logs were turned over to law enforcement agencies by March of '86. But nobody was ever indicted, and Jarrett and Barbara Webb were set free. Same record, these creepy people just get to go live their life willy-nilly. The cherry on top, Larry King was invited back to sing the Star Spangled Banner at the RNC in 88.
Oh yeah, no harm, no foul, man. You've only had multiple people accuse you of molesting them, right? You know, multiple children, but that's it. No big deal.
In May of 1988, a woman named Margot Georgiou and her 17-year-old daughter, Brenda Parker, filed a complaint against an Omaha photographer named Rusty Dang Nelson. And let's not forget, last episode we dropped...
Lest you forget, we talked about Rusty Nelson last week, and he was the one who claimed that Hunter S. Thompson propositioned him to record that snuff film. Again, Rusty Nelson is Larry King's personal photographer.
Yeah. After being propositioned by Nelson, who gave them his card and multiple references and agreed to allow Brenda's mother to accompany her on the shoot, they agreed to come to his residence for a modeling shoot.
This must be before it was well known that predators use these, like, quote-unquote modeling shoots to get their creep on in a bad way.
And seriously, parents, if your kids ever come to you and they're like, so-and-so wants me to be a model, probably just run away screaming the other way because...
And pick them up and take them with you.
Yeah. During the shoot, he repeatedly tried to persuade 17-year-old Brenda to pose in lingerie and show as much cleavage as possible. While her daughter was being photographed, her mother, Margot, looked around at the photos scattered around the apartment and said they included photos of girls ranging from 12 to 20, most of them completely nude.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah. The woman and her daughter were offered a huge platter of fresh fruit and champagne while they were in Rusty Nelson's apartment, and he continuously mentioned his boss who'd set him up with the apartment and kept it well stocked, which they noted in the police report.
And, like, just because an early 20-year-old, you know, lives off cigarettes and alcohol, he's not going to have his house stocked up with fresh fruit.
Brenda thought that Nelson was gay because he said he worked at a gay club downtown and said he frequented gay bars often. A little late to the game, Brenda's mother called Nelson's references, most of whom had never heard of him, save the one who called him a pervert.
Oh, so...
Yeah, do your research, people. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, let's look before we do the photo shoot.
Yes. An officer was sent to Nelson's apartment to investigate and quickly established that Larry King was the boss that Nelson referenced during Brenda's photo shoot.
Oh, I'm so shocked.
And in May of 1988, 2 officers went to Twin Towers apartments and spoke with the owner, who said that Rusty Nelson was occupying apartment 3B, which was leased to Larry King, but had suddenly moved out of the apartment on May 14th, 9 days after Brenda and her mother filed the complaint.
Coincidence?
No. Larry King also paid rent on the luxury penthouse in the same building. The owner said King put over $50,000 in the apartment, and the couch he bought was too big to fit, and he had to hire a crane to get it into his apartment.
What?
I know. Just, you know, I think about it, and I'm like trying to budget my groceries for the week, and...
Just get me a crane to get this damn couch in here.
This is preposterous. That's how rich, creepy people talk, by the way. Okay. He reportedly had a solid silver chair and drove at least 5 vehicles. That sounds uncomfortable, by the way.
I was like, who carried that in?
No, King did not live at this penthouse. He just used it for parties and occasional stays.
I mean, we're talking living it up.
Yeah.
That's where this $40 million was going.
Exactly. King also rented an apartment at the neighboring complex, Orpheum Tower, where he said he needed it for when he had to work late and didn't want to travel home.
That seems mildly questionable. How many apartments do you need?
No kidding. Officer Hawk asked Orpheum manager if she knew or had heard any particulars on Larry King, as it was strange he would rent an apartment at the Orpheum when he already had one at the Twin Towers. She stated she heard rumors he was a very heavy drug dealer for more than one individual. She also heard he was a homosexual and had a preference for young men or boys.
Again,
another person. The OPD dropped its probe of Rusty Nelson, his apparent pornographic operation, or his boss. But in late June of 88, Officer Carmine was dispatched to another girl with a very similar story. 15-year-old Loretta Smith lived with her mother and brother in Omaha. At the time Carmine spoke with her, she was at Richard Young Hospital, where she told the therapist about, in her words, incidents in which she had been photographed nude or partially nude, as well as instances of devil worship. Loretta began that 5 to 6 years prior, when she was 9, she went to a party with friends who were much older than her. I'm just like, where's your mother? What 9-year-old goes to parties?
Well, you know, clearly this is a girl who's spending a lot of time at like these girls' clubs. Her mom is a single mom with 2 kids.
Okay.
She's probably working a lot. She may or may not have an alcohol or drug problem. She may not even ever be around because she might have to work her, like, a morning shift and a night shift or something. Who knows? But, yeah, a 9-year-old is going to these, like, serious parties.
It's like Drew Barrymore's childhood, you know?
Yeah.
On other occasions, she went to the North Omaha Girls Club on Lake Street with her friends. She identified as Kimberly and Nellie Webb. Weird coincidence again, I think not.
Right.
Who she said she discovered were also, quote-unquote, modeling.
Mm-hmm.
They were taken on field trips where they were taken to a studio where they were photographed nude or partially clothed. Loretta had not spoken to the girls in 3 years. She stated the number of adults that men and women participated in photographing nude children.
And so she hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. That's a long time to carry on this elaborate hoax, you know?
Yeah.
Give me a dang break. Give me a break. Are you kidding me?
Loretta also indicated that the adult leaders that took the photos used threats against her and others for their participation, and she had been told on occasion that she and her whole family would be killed if she refused. And that's why kids don't come forward, because they are legitimately scared. They are kids.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to believe, these adults saying, I'm going to kill your family. So.
Well, plus these people really do kill your family, so it's like...
Yeah, they're being completely honest.
Right.
Loretta mentioned Larry King as one of the individuals. When asked how she knew this, she said she was the friend of the daughter of a man named Gary West who owned a gay club, Max, who was also an alcoholic. She said when he became intoxicated, he would tell stories about certain activities with Larry King and indicated he was into the use of cocaine for personal use as well as for sale and owed Larry King a lot of money for this. Don't do drugs, kid. She indicated that King owned a house on Wirt Street and held lots of drug and sex parties there. She stated she'd been to the Wirt house and saw 4 teen boys engaged in oral sex. Later, she gave Carmine the address and phone number for the house on Wirt Street. When he called the number, the phone was answered with King Company, and at the house, Carmine witnessed the name King in black script lettering on an awning.
Oh my gosh. Hello? How does she have...
Okay.
Really with this? I mean, really.
They're just making this up, though. Remember,
Yeah.
okay? This is all just an elaborate hoax.
They're making it up, but she gave an address and a phone number, to which, are you kidding? They checked out?
Like, across this whole thing with no, AIM messenger, no MSN messenger, no
Right.
cell phones. What are they doing? Writing each other snail mail? No. Shut your mouth.
No, man. Truly, this is horrifyingly mind-boggling. Totally crazy.
During 1988, Loretta began trusting her doctors and nurses as she got to know them and began to open up and reveal more of what she witnessed and went through. In a report for the legislature's Franklin Committee in 1989, it stated, Loretta provided additional information of cult activity, including witnessing homicides of several young children, and which also include a reference Larry King and others. In August of 1988, Loretta was asked to give chronological accounts of her involvement in the cult, and she agreed. She said she initially did not know what was happening and became involved very gradually, which is probably why they wanted them so young, so they don't, they don't know anything else except for what's happening around them.
And they're vulnerable, like these are generally speaking, these kids don't have both parents at home. Not to say that you have to have both parents at home to have a healthy family life. They don't have a healthy family life. They are, frequenting clubs to be able to like have some sort of adult care. And then those people who are supposed to be providing them care are taking advantage of them.
At approximately 9 years old, she was going to the Omaha Girls Club, and a guy named Ray would take the girls on outings, which included about 5 to 6 girls total. The first time he took them to a seemingly abandoned building and asked if they wanted to go in, and they agreed. They sat and talked, and Ray provided a joint, and they all got high. This activity continued for 3 weeks, then Ray took them to a party. At the party, there were 10 men, all in their mid-30s. Initially, they sat around talking with the girls about their problems while everyone got wasted. Then the men made the girls have sex with them, and they had no choice in the matter. Loretta stayed away from the girls' club after that for a few days, but then to get out of the house, she did go to the parties again for another 6 months. On one occasion, she threatened to tell her mother that the men knew she was 9 and they were forcing her to have sex, and they threatened anyone who told anyone with murder. The men started taking girls to power meetings when Loretta was 10 years old. She said they had a lot of lit candles, and at one of the first meetings, the girls were told the room was going to spin. She later realized they had been drugged. 8 minutes later, they were put through the first test.
This gets pretty disturbing. Her and the other girls were taken to a building in Omaha where she was locked in a room with a white infant. Around midnight, the men came in the room and took the little girl away. They told her she could achieve power by killing something that she really loved. She said that the men then cut the little girl's head off, stuck it on the wall, and made her sit in front of it. She later had to take the head off the wall, and then the men held her down while they cut the little girl's eyes out. Then they left Loretta in the room with the girl's body, locking the door for 24 hours, during which she could hear another of the girls screaming while the men were whipping and beating her. The most depraved mind could not come up with that. That is just the most depraved thing I've ever heard. Shortly after the 24 hours was up, the men came into the room and they told her that she had passed the test and drove her a couple blocks from her home and let her out of the car. So the next time she saw the men was at a friend's party where the men showed up. She identified two of the men as Larry King and a Mr. Finch, who Loretta indicated was a principal, which we already heard that name in the story from the Webb children, the principal of the Omaha High School. After one such party, another girl called the Omaha Police Department and reported that she was raped and tried to press charges. The other girls covered up the rape for the men. Loretta then threatened to tell her mom again, and the men said that they would kill her and her mom if she spoke a word about what was happening to her. And at another meeting, Loretta indicated that devil worship was practiced and a small boy was sacrificed. She and another girl could hear him screaming, then said the child was fried and fed to the girls. I mean, this is the most...
What is even happening?
I know. Loretta said that she refused to participate, so she was beaten for 2 days. And then she described 3 more incidents where sacrifices for power took place. One was a 1-year-old white female who had her head taken off by a saw. Another was a 4-year-old white male who was hung on the wall and darts were thrown at him. And then the third was a 3-year-old Indian female that had several parts of her body cut off, then ground and poured over the girls, and then they were forced to drink her remains. Truly, this is worse than any horror movie I've ever seen. This is bizarre. You know, it is so bizarre that it makes you wonder, is this true? But I mean, I don't know. I can't doubt one part of her story and believe the rest of it. So, and I believe her, so I don't know. So the men would try to scare the girls by making them watch them mutilate animals, and that they would just torture them by cutting off body parts instead of killing them. So they were just constantly threatening them on top of abusing them to instill fear and not make them go and tell anybody. She said the cult members' clothes had upside down crosses on them, and the leader always wore a long black cape with gold rings shaped like skeleton heads. She went into the Emmanuel Hospital for the first time in October of 1985, and then was also in the same hospital in January and March of 86. So she went repeatedly for psychiatric help because of everything that she was going through. To the expert eye of the Foster Care Review Board Executive Director Carol Stitt, when she received the reports from Loretta's caseworker, the testimony appeared highly credible. She said, "One of the things you want to keep in mind, this girl is very concrete about who was present at these homicides, what was happening, the dates, and gave lots of specific information. And when you're working with children, one of the ways that you know that this is not a global fantasy is the more details that they give you." Obviously, these kids had a butt ton of details. I mean, they are not lacking in any way for details.
No.
Info given by Loretta Smith overlapped and corroborated what was already at the hands of the authorities from the children at the Webb House and also from Margot Giorgio and her daughter Brenda. This is already 3 separate cases involving pornography, child abuse, ritual murder, and the children's testimony and other evidence that converged on Larry Mother Heckin King. All 3 of these people have generally the same story revolving around the same people with the same details. What the hell are you trying to tell me that they're not legitimate? BS, dude. In July of 1988, the Omaha police officers in the robbery and sex unit lied to their boss, Chief Robert Wadman, about their investigation into Larry King, and they told him no, they were not investigating him when they were directly asked. They had been conducting what they called a super sensitive investigation and weren't even using the steno pool at the Omaha PD, but were handwriting all of their police reports. They feared a cover-up of King's activities from within the department.
Well, duh.
Yeah. The Foster Care Review Board official Dennis Carlson, in testimony to the legislature's executive board in December of 1988, said that the investigation into Loretta Smith's charges didn't go far in Wadman's department, and neither did the career of Officer Carmine, who Shai talked about a moment ago, who had first interviewed Loretta. One afternoon in June of 88, immediately after his interview with Loretta, Carmine's supervisor, Sergeant Ken Bovasso, spoke to Dr. Kay Schilling, Loretta's psychiatrist at the hospital, and Carmine's boss proceeded to write a report stating that Loretta only gave very general information to Carmine and that he would have to follow up to build rapport to get any actual info. But Carmine never came back. The doctors and the executive board director, Carlson, had called the investigator Carmine 3 or more times, telling him that Loretta was giving more and more information about Larry King and tons of additional information as she was relating better to her caseworkers. They begged him to please come back and re-interview the girl as she was talking about homicides. Carmine said he needed to get back out and interview her, but he never came. Carlson said that he hand-delivered information and seemed genuine about investigating the allegations, and in the end, Carmine had completely abandoned everything, not even interviewing the girl about the homicide allegations at any point. The FCRB director, Carol Stitt, testified, "I'd like to add something was highly unusual in this case. Loretta's psychiatrist contacted police in Omaha, asking them to come. Her personal care worker, Ken Stoner, contacted police. Richard Young Hospital employee, Kirsten Hallberg, contacted police, as well as her supervisor. They all made contact with the police about coming and interviewing this girl, and nothing was done." Not long after his interview with Loretta, Carmine was transferred out of investigations altogether. So an old friend of his, Senator Ernie Chambers, said that he kept calling the sexual assault unit and they were telling him that he wasn't there anymore, and they finally admitted that he was in a division called Research and Planning. And when he got him on the phone, he told Carmine that he felt he had been enthusiastic about the investigation at the offset and that he had developed credible evidence, and he felt that he'd been transferred because he was getting too close to something and his supervisors did not want him to continue. So he said Carmine just sat there in silence for a minute, and then he kind of chuckled and said, "Well, no, I wanted this transfer." And he said he'd known Carmine for years and he wasn't the type to want to be put into an office by himself. And he honestly thought that they created that division simply to put him somewhere to get him off of the case where he was beginning to question Loretta. Yeah. And she was telling him all this stuff.
Well, guys, I actually have to head out. My dog had 11 puppies last night, so I got to do a dog check and then pick up my stepson from school. But Ashley's taking over the rest of it. I hope you all are...
There's plenty more to come.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I get much more nighttime talk show voice whenever I'm by myself. Okay, so he believed that this was all a matter of them moving Carmine out of investigation so that he would stop investigating this case into Larry King. I agree. Carmine himself testified in June of 89 that although he was pulled off the case, he thought Loretta's charges were credible and deserved follow-up. That's after he was pulled off the case. He testified this because he's not a lying sack of poo. Less than 2 weeks later, Chief Wadman, who we recall they were lying to because they thought he would try to cover up the Larry King investigation, tried to get Carmine declared crazy by posting an inter-office communication to Omaha Public Safety Director Pittman Foxall. Pittman Foxall, which is one of the most serious names I've ever heard, who was one of Larry King's other cousins, where Wadman announced that Carmine needed a mental health evaluation, stating that it was due to his actions demonstrated during the Larry King investigation, and then finished with, the investigation into Larry King never came close to supporting the allegations. Are you freaking kidding me right now? Are you kidding me right now? Basically, what this was doing was discrediting Carmine and any leads that he might have accumulated or any file he might have created on Larry King. It's now discredited because his boss has said that he is crazy. This is how they discredit you and make it impossible for you to bring justice in the situation. So one other Omaha policeman was reported to have kept a file on Larry King. His name was Bill Skoleski, and he died of a heart attack suddenly. You know, and I'm not saying that that is 100% suspicious, just a noteworthy little bit of information. In August of 89, Chief Wadman dismissed Loretta's and the other children's claims of horrific abuse, all of them. On an Omaha radio station, the chief law enforcement officer said that some Omahans had a twisted fascination with child abuse and sex abuse, and that media attention of those things was absolutely inappropriate. How many times do I have to say, are you kidding me on this episode? But are you freaking kidding me right now? I mean, listen to me. I sound like Nancy damn Grace over here. I'm pissed off, though, because we have the chief of police, who, by the way, we already heard that the chief of police was being accused of sadistic sex abuse with children. I don't know if it's this bastard or not, but covering up for your buddies on something this horrific is absolutely a travesty. What a trash. So he's on the freaking radio discrediting victims and basically saying that if you try to cover in your news publications anything having to do with the possibility that there are adults running a child sex ring and abuse and committing homicide, that you are only helping these creeps out by giving them fodder or whatever. Like, that is ridiculous. And talk about influencing the media. Regarding Loretta, he said that she made bizarre statements that were not founded in reality. Hold me back. Really? He said that the OPD and other agencies conducted a thorough investigation and that all allegations led to a dead end. I already can tell you in what I've investigated and even told you in this one episode that is absolutely wrong. Stick it up your rear, dude. Okay, so Chief Wadman swore all of this under oath, along with saying that he hardly knew Larry King and had very few social contacts with him. Larry King, however, said otherwise. In an April '89 interview with Larry King and Chief Wadman in the Omaha News, they were both questioned on an incident in which Wadman intervened at King's request to release a suitcase that was seized in a drug raid. He said that they had the kind of friendship where he could just ask this favor. King said, and I quote, "I felt that I could call on anyone in this city." So basically, King felt like everybody in the city was his errand boy. He could make anybody do anything. And essentially, he's getting away with it, obviously. So then Wadman went on and explained his version of the whole Rusty Nelson situation, completely blowing it off and saying that Rusty was a legit photographer who simply subleased his apartment from King, which we know isn't true because all of his references didn't check out. No one knew who he was. And the one person who did know who he was said he was a pervert. So interesting. And we also know that Rusty was claiming that his boss leased the apartment to him and his boss stocked up the apartment for him. So Larry King, he didn't simply just sublease his apartment from Larry in some like random deal. He thought of him as his boss. Wadman also swore under oath that he knew nothing of the business relationship claims, the lavish spending, the multiple decadent apartments, drug dealing, or other pedophile activity. None of it, even though there are there are caseworker reports after caseworker reports stating as such. The Nebraska Foster Care Review Board is not a law enforcement agency and is not equipped to investigate or prosecute crimes. That said, the FCRB found itself in 1988 the main recipient of child abuse reports from caseworkers attesting to the existence of an organized child exploitation ring in Nebraska and stretching far beyond that. This Foster Care Review Board repeatedly expressed frustration and alarm at the Omaha police's failure to investigate reports of child murder and other serious crimes, even after urgent phone calls from personnel at the Richard Young Hospital. Let that sink in for a second. They are overwhelmed. They can't prosecute anyone. They're trying to get the police to intervene, and the police are absolutely ignoring them altogether. Deep breath. In May of 1988, the FCRB received a call from Kirsten Hallberg, a previous employee of the Utah Haley Girls Village, maybe that's how you say it, who had also worked for the Richard Young Psychiatric Hospital in Omaha. She was aware of Nellie and her younger sister's reports to the review board. She also mentioned 3 Utah Haley girls, a 20-year-old man at Richard Young Hospital, and 3 other boys at Boys Town who all reported inappropriate activity with none other than Larry King. At a child exploitation conference in Kansas, a detective from Kansas City asked her when Nebraska authorities were going to do something about Larry King. So law enforcement agencies in other states knew about this Larry King situation and knew that they weren't doing anything about it. And I guess were too afraid to do anything about it themselves, if they could. In July, Hallberg reported that a 15-year-old girl at Richard Young Hospital who spoke of abuse involving Larry King had also mentioned that he murdered a young boy who said he was going to tell someone of all the abuse going on. So there's a murder allegation against Larry King. In July, FCRB's executive director, Carol Stitt, met with Governor Orr, who told her to do whatever was necessary to secure an investigation into the matter. 7 days later, Stitt wrote Attorney General Robert Spire requesting an investigation into claims Loretta Smith and other children had made. Now, this is the first time that testimony from Nellie, Kimberly, Loretta, and all the other children were compiled. All of this time of all these allegations, this is the first time that testimony from all of them was compiled. All of the case files containing report after report of similar abuse and homicide claims involving local children was turned over to the Attorney General. They gave them everything they had. The Attorney General Spire, he assured the FCRB that he'd do everything in his power to help, and he assigned one of his top assistants to take over the case for him. And months went by with little apparent action on the part of the Attorney General. So Stitt and Dennis Carlson had scheduled a meeting with Howland, who was the person that was leading the investigation for the Attorney General. In the meeting, it was clear that Howland had hardly read any of the material in the copious files that they had given him. He knew none of the major player names and none of the information, and when it became clear that nothing had occurred as far as the investigation was concerned, Stitt grabbed the file from him and they left in despair. They realized that they had previously just been placated by the AG and his team, and the fellow executive board members were equally puzzled and baffled by the fact that they had presented so much corroborating evidence and nothing had been done about it in any way by the police, by the Attorney General, nobody. All of this evidence, they were baffled. Stitt tried to meet with the governor again to get attention to the case and scheduled a meeting with him. The governor's office canceled the meeting the following day and then proceeded to tell her that they were not willing to meet. Who got to these SOBs? What connection do they have to this? Although the AG claimed in the Lincoln Journal in December of '88 that his office had acted promptly and professionally on all the sensitive information, it was only on that very same day that the State Patrol, who is the agency that the Attorney General is going to appoint to do the investigation, that was the first day that they conducted their first investigation on the matter. The day he gave that quote to the Lincoln Journal stating that they had done all this work and acted professionally and promptly. Yet the day he's giving that interview is the first day an actual investigation is conducted. Go screw yourself. So Stitt went to the Douglas County Attorney General's office to file a protective order for Loretta due to the danger that she was in for making her claims. Once the order was placed, it stated that she was making bizarre statements, had been living on the street for 2 weeks, and was suicidal. These were completely untrue and were not the statements that Stitt or Hallberg made whatsoever. These statements would only serve to discredit Loretta in court if her cases were to go to trial. And you gotta think that's probably why they were put there. I say probably, that is absolutely why they were put there. When Stitt was giving testimony to the executive board in December of '88, the man conducting the interview, Senator Chambers, was familiar with the woman at the Attorney General's office who had filed the protective order for Stitt. Her name was Liz Kronkovich, and as Chambers explained to Carol Stitt, Liz had already had information given to her by certain professionals about some of the things these children had been saying and alleging, and she chose to do nothing. According to a private investigator for the Attorney General's office, one time Loretta told a priest at Boys Town that the FBI and Kronkovich had intimidated her so much at Richard Young Hospital that she didn't give them the info that she knew. So, I mean, do you see the levels here? So here's Carol Stitt's quote about this. At this point, everything the perpetrator has told them is being reinforced. He has power. There's nothing they can do. Nobody's going to help them. And that's certainly what's happened so far. And that is where we are going to end the first part of our coverage on the Franklin cover-up. And as I just said, I think it's fairly apparent all the levels of corruption and cover-up that are needed in order to make something like this be possible. And to some people, that may make it hard for them to believe. But, I mean, listen to all of these facts and think with a logical mind about truly how deep a hoax would have to have been. Like we already mentioned, these were children. These were children who didn't talk to each other regularly. Some of them hadn't seen each other for 3 to 5 years, and they corroborated stories and continued to relay the same details over and over. And as you saw, they are elaborate in their details. It is not there was a man and he kind of looked like he was kind of short but kind of tall, and he had brownish, reddish, blondish, blackish hair. It is, there was a man named Larry King. There was a man named Mr. Finch, and he was a principal. Like, don't even start with me on trying to say that this information is just all this great big hoax. I will not even accept it. So, as you can see, it gets me pretty ticked off. Bohemian Grove really only gave you a little glimpse into the horrors that are these powerful, absolutely sadistic, child abusers. And this Franklin, I mean, while it, like I said at the outset, it might seem like, why do I want to listen to a 2-hour podcast about a Franklin credit union cover up? Because every single detail of this case is more horrifying than the one that you just heard before it. We haven't even gotten into Paul Benassi and Alicia Owens' testimony, and we already have stacked up a hefty episode for you here. So, Shai's already left me. We're gonna call it a day here. I am gonna come back again with a second part to this Franklin cover-up. There may be a third. We will have to see. Again, we appreciate everybody for listening. Your support is so greatly appreciated. So anything you can do to spread the word about the podcast and help us gain some more listeners and supporters, that it would be greatly appreciated. I know that we kind of scaled back our episodes per month, and I appreciate everybody for understanding, but it really takes a lot of research to get these episodes as full and informative as I want. You know, I don't want to put out a half-assed episode where I have information wrong or there's just not all of the information I want to include. So I want everything to be as cohesive and powerful as possible. And it really helps to have a few extra days to do so. So I do appreciate your patience, and we're working on a Patreon campaign and getting some extra episodes out to everybody who participates in that. So that's big news on the horizon. Like we say every week, if you have any suggestions, any comments, any questions, we are at creepitrealpod@gmail.com, and you can find us on Instagram at creepitrealpod. Look us up on Facebook. You just have to search for Creep It Real. We are all over the place, and we want to be even more places. So if you could help us in any way, share the pod, share the episode, do whatever you can. We would appreciate it greatly, and we will even shout you out on future episodes. So I will talk to you guys in about a week, and keep it real out there. We will talk to you later.